Hello everybody and welcome back to our final discussion of Unit 3 covering Chapter 20 on aerobic endurance training. When you are working on aerobic endurance training, there are three things you need to focus on. The first of them being your aerobic capacity or your VO2 max. So this is the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can take in and utilize for energy. The second thing we're concerned of is the economy of movement. So how well and how efficient are you at performing your particular movement? So if you are a runner, this would be your running economy. If you were a swimmer, this would be swimming economy, and so on and so forth. The third and final thing we are concerned about is your lactate threshold. So we know that lactate is the byproduct of glycolysis, which is our anaerobic component of physical activity. As you go through vigorous bouts of physical activity, your aerobic system can only do so much, so glycolysis and your ATP PCR system are going to kick in to help give you the rest of the ATP you need. So when you're going through excessive amounts of glycolysis, lactate is going to build up. Your body is going to try to shuttle it out of the working muscle to your liver in order for it to be reconverted into glucose through gluconeogenesis. Well, the unfortunate thing is when you have high levels of lactate in your blood, we start altering things like the blood pH, and we become less efficient in our movement. So everybody has a threshold where you start to get a point of diminishing returns in your performance output. So when I am training somebody for aerobic training, I want to pay attention to their maximal aerobic capacity, their economy of movement, and where they can go in their lactate threshold. So how do we actually train this? First, we need to pick a mode of activity. We want to be specific as possible. So if I am a runner, I want this person to run. If I am a swimmer, I want this person to swim. If I'm a crew athlete, I want this person to row. So the more specific your movement and training style is towards the actual sport you are training for, the more efficient and better your training will be. The second thing you want to pay attention to is the frequency of training. So your frequency is going to be determined a lot based on the intensity, the duration, and the mode of activity that you have chosen. Also, your training status and the time of the season. So for example, when you are in season, you do not want to be spending a lot of time conditioning. At that point, performance is your main focus, not getting in shape. So typically we see lots of endurance conditioning in the off season and not exactly during the in season. Also, if you have a newbie athlete, you're going to train them in different frequencies than a more mature and advanced athlete. Next, you're going to pay attention to intensity. So how do you measure intensity? We have three distinct ways we typically use for aerobic training. The first one is RPE, that is a rating of perceived exertion. Typically, we use the Borg scale from 6 to 20 for this. Where 6 is I'm sitting on the couch watching Netflix, life is great, this is really easy, all the way up to 20 where this is the hardest workout I've ever done in my life. Typically we think of moderate intensity somewhere between 12 and 15, and vigorous intensity 15 and above. The cool thing is that RPE with the Borg scale tends to match up with individuals' heart rates. So when people say, and put this RPE at about 13, typically it's pretty close to 130 beats per minute. So the Borg scale can be very helpful. But this also takes a very self-aware person. The second thing we can do is we can measure your heart rate. So looking at the heart rate, we put a heart rate monitor on the individual. You can do the chest strap version, you can do the wrist version, like if you have a Fitbit. There's also a forearm or an upper arm band that will measure all this for us. And basically we measure intensity using a couple different formulas. Your third option is going to be METs. So these stand for metabolic equivalents. Typically 1 MET is 3.5 mLs per kg per minute. And then as we go up in METs, basically we take whatever somebody's VO2 is, divide by 3.5, and we get a MET measurement. Basically from here, 0 to 3 is light exercise, 3 to 6 is moderate, and 6 and above is vigorous levels of activity. So you'll notice a lot of the gym equipment, if you go run on a treadmill or on a bike, will actually give you your METs. This is based on equations trying to estimate your level of intensity. After you've determined an intensity, you're going to have to think about a duration. So when you have higher intensity activities, you're going to do this for lower periods of time And vice versa, if you have less intensity, you could go for longer periods of time. So you have to have a balance. Then finally, you want to think about progressions. So if you start to increase frequency or intensity and duration, you're going to have to kind of interplay back and forth with all of those. So when you are going to progress people, you try to not progress them more than 10% a week at a time. So if I increase the intensity by 10%, that is just fine. I increase the intensity by 20%, that is not fine. All right, there's a cat. So this then comes down to the different types of training. So first we have long, slow distance training. So this is going to be for long periods of time at a lower intensity for a more frequent time period, right? This is really good for beginning runners. It gets them accustomed to running, but it's not the best for more elite athletes. They're going to already have a high level of endurance, not the most efficient time for them. Next, you have pace/tempo runs. This is going to play a lot with that running economy and the lactate threshold. So you are going to run at your race pace for various lengths and periods of time. Next, you have interval training and high intensity interval training. These are both based off of intervals, which makes sense. However, high intensity interval training tends to be more of a mix of cardiovascular and anaerobic resistance style training, where interval training tends to be an interplay between your rest and work sessions. And then finally, you have FARTLEK training. Yes, I know that sounds funny. It means speed play. So we're going to constantly be varying the speed of our workouts. So for example, if anybody has run X's before, you sprint corner to corner on a field, and then you usually jog, skip, or run the baseline, and then you sprint the next. This is fairly common, or if you've ever done the track workout where you sprint the straights, jog the curves, this is another example of FARTLEK training. So, other essential considerations when we're doing aerobic training, you have to pay attention to when you are going to be going through cross-training, tapering, and detraining. So tapering, as we know from our previous discussions, you need to back down the volume and the frequency of workouts while maintaining the intensity in order to prepare for, say, a conference competition. Detraining is when you just start to generally get out of shape. It is the body readapting down to its baseline level. You have to give people a break at some point. Detraining is going to happen, but you want to make sure that this is minimal as possible, especially for endurance athletes. They start to lose cardiovascular conditioning within 3 days of stopping physical activity. So you get out of shape very quickly. So make sure you're still maintaining some level of cardiovascular fitness, but they don't always need to be game ready. The next one I mentioned, cross-training. So it is going to be very important, and there are benefits to using different styles of aerobic endurance training while preparing for sport. So there is nothing wrong with the distance runner going for a swim, or the swimmer going for a run. It is very common to do dry land training with swimming and crew teams. This is perfectly acceptable. However, you need to make sure a majority of the training is still specific to the sport. So just because the swimmers and the crew team go for a run doesn't mean that's the only form of conditioning they are getting. Next, let's talk about altitude really quick. So when you participate in aerobic activity at altitude, what's going to end up happening is your VO2 is going to decrease because the pressure of available oxygen is also going to decrease. This means you will be much less efficient at pulling oxygen from the air. Because this has happened, you're going to hyperventilate in order to allow more oxygen into the bloodstream, and this is going to make it more difficult to perform activities at altitude. And then the final thing I want you to consider is resistance training with aerobic training. So if you're an aerobic athlete and you do resistance training, it can only help you. But make sure that you are doing the type of training that you are training for first, and then the resistance training. So if you are a runner, go for your run and then lift. Not the other way around, because then the lifting will impede your performance in the run. However, if you are a resistance training athlete, so a strength-based athlete, and then you do an excessive amount of endurance training, it's actually going to be a detriment to your strength and power performance. So again, do whatever your goal is first. So if I'm a strength athlete, I'm going to go lift and then I'll get some cardio in. If I am an endurance athlete, I'm going to go get my run or my cardio in, this endurance training, and then I'm going to go lift. So pay particular attention to the order of your training. So with that said, that is chapter 20 in a nutshell. I will see you guys back for Unit 4. Bye.